"He took my legs." These words echoed across the blood-soaked ruins of Okinawa, 1945. A black medic crawls through shattered schoolhouse rubble as artillery screams overhead. 3 terrified Japanese women huddle in darkness, one with a crushed leg, believing the propaganda about black demons. When he lifts the injured woman onto his back, whispering, "I'm taking your legs for a while," they expect cruelty. Instead, they witness compassion. But as white MPs snarl orders and shove the medic, the women watch in stunned silence. The hatred directed at him burns hotter than what's aimed at them. Through mud-choked roads and rain-soaked nights, he carries her broken body while his fellow Americans mock his humanity. The women's fear transforms to something unexpected: respect. A drunken sergeant threatens them all under starlit canvas. Danger encircles them like barbed wire. What happens when war's greatest enemies find more kindness in each other than in their own ranks? And in a world determined to strip away dignity, can compassion survive where shells and bullets cannot? The shell came screaming in just before dawn. Isaiah Coleman woke to the world shaking and dirt raining down on his face. His ears rang and dust filled his lungs. He coughed hard and blinked through the darkness. Another day in hell. Another day on Okinawa. Isaiah pushed himself up and grabbed his medic's bag. Around him, the other men from his segregated unit were doing the same, brushing off sleep and fear, ready for whatever came next. They'd been at this for weeks now. April 1945. The war grinding toward its bloody end. "Artillery hit something in the village," someone shouted. "They're calling for medics." Isaiah nodded and tightened the straps on his helmet. The red cross painted on it was supposed to protect him. He knew better. The Japanese fought to the death. They didn't care about red crosses. Neither did some of the white soldiers, if he was being honest. The morning air hung heavy with smoke as he jogged toward the village. The sun wasn't up yet, but fires lit the sky with an angry orange glow. Isaiah's boots sank into the mud with every step. Rain had fallen all night, turning the island into a swamp. The village was just a cluster of small houses, or it had been. Now it was mostly rubble. Their own artillery had hit it, a mistake in the darkness. Isaiah could tell from the shell patterns. He'd seen enough of them by now. In here. A white lieutenant waved him toward what looked like a collapsed school building. "Thought I heard voices." Isaiah nodded and approached the building. The lieutenant didn't look at him twice. In battle, they needed every medic, even the black ones. It was only after, in the quiet moments, that the color lines got drawn again. The schoolhouse had partly fallen in. One wall still stood, but the roof had collapsed. Isaiah dropped to his knees and crawled through a gap in the debris. Dust and smoke burned his eyes. A beam of early morning light cut through a hole in what remained of the roof, illuminating floating particles of dust. Then he heard it, a soft whimpering, words in Japanese. Isaiah moved carefully over broken boards and chunks of plaster. "Hello?" he called softly. "I'm a medic. I'm here to help." The whimpering stopped. Then came fearful whispers. He followed the sound to a corner where the ceiling had partially held. 3 women huddled together in the small space. They were young, maybe 20s. Their clothes were torn and dirty. One had blood running down her face from a cut on her forehead. Another cradled her arm, which bent at a wrong angle. The third, the smallest, had her leg trapped under a fallen beam. When they saw Isaiah, they pressed back against the wall. Their eyes went wide with terror. "Kuroi Akuma," one whispered. "Black demon." Isaiah had heard it before. The Japanese propaganda described American soldiers as devils, and black soldiers as something even worse. He raised his hands slowly, showing his empty palms. "I'm a medic," he said again, pointing to the red cross on his helmet and armband. "Doctor," he added, hoping they might understand. The women stared at him, trembling. The one with the trapped leg moaned softly in pain. Isaiah pointed to himself. "Isaiah," he said clearly. "My name is Isaiah." He moved slowly toward the woman with the trapped leg. The others flinched, but didn't scream. Progress, at least. He examined the beam, too heavy to lift alone, and her leg looked badly crushed. "I'm going to help you," he said gently, knowing they wouldn't understand his words, but hoping they'd hear the kindness in them. He reached into his bag and pulled out morphine. He held it up so they could see it. "Medicine," he said. "For pain." The woman with the trapped leg watched him with dark, frightened eyes. Isaiah mimed an injection, then pointed to her leg. After a moment of hesitation, she gave a tiny nod. He administered the morphine carefully. Within minutes, her face relaxed slightly as the drug took effect. Isaiah turned to the beam again. He couldn't lift it alone, and he couldn't leave them here. More shells could hit at any moment. He made a decision. Gently, he slid his arms under the woman with the crushed leg. "I'm taking you to our aid station," he said. "All of you." They didn't understand, but when he lifted the small woman, the other two stood shakily. They would follow. The woman in his arms was light. Too light. Her bones felt like a bird's beneath his hands. She stiffened at first, then slowly relaxed as the morphine worked through her system. "Your legs don't work right now," Isaiah murmured as he carried her toward the gap in the rubble. "So I'm taking your legs for a while." Outside, the sky had lightened to a murky gray. Artillery boomed in the distance. Isaiah stepped out of the ruined building with the woman in his arms and the other two following close behind. All around them, war continued its grim business. The rain started again as Isaiah carried the injured woman toward the American lines. The other two women followed close behind, one supporting the other with the broken arm. They flinched at every distant explosion, but they kept moving. Isaiah's boots squelched in the mud. Sweat mixed with rain on his face, despite the cool morning air. The woman in his arms hardly weighed anything, but carrying her while navigating the muddy terrain was still hard work. When they reached the perimeter of the makeshift aid station, two white MPs spotted them. Their hands went instantly to their holstered sidearms. "Halt!" one shouted. Isaiah stopped. The women behind him huddled closer. "I found survivors," Isaiah called. "One has a crushed leg, another's got a broken arm." The MPs approached cautiously, hands still on their weapons. When they got closer, their expressions changed from suspicion to something uglier. "What the hell, Coleman?" the taller MP said. "These are Jap women." "They're injured civilians," Isaiah replied evenly. "I'm bringing them in for medical attention." The shorter MP stepped closer, his face twisting into a sneer. "Put them down, now." "This one can't walk," Isaiah said, nodding to the woman in his arms. "Her leg is crushed." "I don't care if both her legs are missing. Put her down." Isaiah hesitated. The woman in his arms tensed, sensing the hostility. "Now, boy!" the MP barked, using the word white men always used when they wanted to remind Isaiah of his place. Slowly, carefully, Isaiah lowered the woman to the ground. She winced as he set her down, even with the morphine dulling her pain. The other two women immediately crouched beside her, forming a protective circle. The taller MP grabbed Isaiah's arm and pulled him roughly away from the women. "What were you thinking, bringing them in?" he demanded. "Getting a little too close to the enemy, huh?" "They're civilians," Isaiah repeated. "Women caught in the crossfire." "They're Japs," the shorter MP said, as if that explained everything. "And you had your hands all over this one." He jerked his thumb toward the woman with the crushed leg. Isaiah stood straight, his face carefully blank. He'd learned long ago how to hide his feelings when white men were trying to provoke him. "I was providing medical assistance," he said, "as is my duty." The MPs exchanged a look. Then the taller one shoved Isaiah hard enough to make him stumble backward. "Your duty is whatever we say it is," he growled. "And right now, your duty is to guard these prisoners until someone figures out what to do with them. They need medical, they'll get what they get," the MP cut him off. "You stay with them. Right here. Don't move. Don't touch them again." Isaiah looked at the women. They were watching the exchange with wide, confused eyes. Something in their expressions had changed. They'd seen how the white men treated him. They were beginning to understand that in this army, Isaiah wasn't much higher in status than they were. The MPs stalked away, presumably to report to their superior officer. Isaiah stood near the women, rain soaking through his uniform. The woman with the crushed leg looked up at him, her face pale with pain. After a moment, Isaiah moved to a nearby supply dump and grabbed a torn canvas sheet. He returned and rigged up a makeshift shelter, using his rifle and a broken wooden crate to hold up the corners. It wasn't much, but it kept the worst of the rain off the women. Thunder rolled across the sky as Isaiah sat down just outside the canvas, rain running down his neck. The women watched him warily from their small shelter. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. Humiliation had its own silent language, and Isaiah was fluent in it. By midday, the rain had stopped, but gray clouds still hung low over the island. The aid station bustled with activity as wounded soldiers were brought in, treated, and either returned to duty or evacuated further back from the front lines. Isaiah sat beside the three women, still under orders not to move from that spot. No one had come to check on them or provide medical care. White corpsmen walked past occasionally, some throwing curious glances their way, others pretending not to see them at all. The woman with the crushed leg, Isaiah had heard the others call her Yuki, was in obvious pain. The morphine had worn off hours ago. Her face was tight, her breathing shallow. The cut on the second woman's forehead had stopped bleeding, but needed cleaning. The third woman cradled her broken arm against her chest, wincing whenever she moved. Isaiah couldn't just sit there and watch them suffer. He glanced around. The MPs were nowhere in sight. Everyone else was busy with their own tasks. Slowly, he reached into his medic's bag and pulled out his canteen and some clean bandages. "I'm going to help you," he said softly to the women, not caring that they couldn't understand his words. His tone and gestures would have to communicate what language couldn't. He moved first to the woman with the cut on her forehead. She stiffened as he approached, but didn't pull away. Gently, he cleaned the wound with water from his canteen and a clean cloth. The woman watched his eyes the whole time, her own still wary but no longer filled with terror. When he finished, he tied a small bandage around her head. "There," he said, "that should keep it clean." She touched the bandage lightly with her fingertips and gave him a slight nod. Next, Isaiah turned to the woman with the broken arm. This would be harder. He mimed what he needed to do, showing how he would straighten and splint the arm. The woman's eyes widened, and she shook her head frantically. "It will hurt," Isaiah acknowledged, making a pained face and then pointing to her arm. "But after, it will be better." He made a motion of straightening the arm, then gave a thumbs up. The woman with the head wound, Hana, he thought her name was, spoke rapidly to her friend. After a moment, the injured woman gave a reluctant nod. Isaiah worked quickly but gently. The woman bit her lip to keep from crying out as he straightened her arm. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes. Isaiah murmured soothing words as he worked, the same words he'd say to any injured soldier. "You're doing great. Almost done. Hang in there." When he finished splinting the arm with pieces of wood from a broken crate and strips of bandage, the woman exhaled shakily. "Arigato," she whispered. "You're welcome," Isaiah replied. Finally, he turned to Yuki, the woman with the crushed leg. This was beyond what he could fix with his limited supplies. She needed proper medical attention, maybe even surgery. But he could at least make her more comfortable. He gave her another dose of morphine, less than he should have used for the level of pain she was in, but he had to conserve his supplies. Then he carefully examined her leg. It was badly crushed below the knee, the flesh already dark with bruising, but the bleeding was minimal, which was something to be thankful for. Isaiah used more strips of bandage and pieces of wood to create a crude splint that would keep her leg stable. Yuki watched him work, her eyes now more curious than afraid. As he finished tying off the last bandage, he heard footsteps approaching. Isaiah quickly tucked his medical supplies back into his bag, but not quickly enough. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Coleman?" Isaiah looked up to see one of the MPs from earlier striding toward him, face flushed with anger. "They needed medical attention," Isaiah said, standing to face the man. "Those aren't your orders," the MP snapped. "Your orders are to guard them, not play doctor." "I am a doctor," Isaiah replied evenly. "A medic. That's my job." The MP stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Your job is what I say it is, and helping Jap women is beyond your place. You get me?" Isaiah said nothing. The message was clear enough. The MP wasn't just enforcing military protocol. He was enforcing the racial order that followed them even to this island on the other side of the world. "Those bandages come from our supplies," the MP continued. "Supplies meant for American boys. You steal from your own to help the enemy?" "They're civilians," Isaiah said for what felt like the 100th time. "And they're hurt." The MP's eyes narrowed. "Watch yourself, Coleman. Some might say you're getting too friendly with these women. That wouldn't look good for you, would it?" The threat hung in the air between them. Isaiah had heard stories about black soldiers accused of improper behavior with white women back home, accusations that often led to beatings, imprisonment, or worse. The same rules didn't apply to Japanese women exactly, but the MP was making it clear. Helping these women could be twisted into something it wasn't. "I'm doing my job," Isaiah said quietly. "Nothing more. See that it stays that way." The MP gave him a final warning look, then walked away. Isaiah sat back down beside the women. They had watched the entire exchange, and though they couldn't understand the words, they understood the tone well enough. Yuki reached out hesitantly and touched Isaiah's hand. "Medic," she said softly. "Good." Isaiah pulled his hand away gently and looked toward the distant hills where artillery still boomed. Being seen as good by these women was a dangerous thing, but he couldn't bring himself to regret helping them. The afternoon dragged on. The pain medication Isaiah had given Yuki was wearing off again, but he didn't dare give her more with the MPs watching. The other two women, Hana with the head wound and Aiko with the broken arm, sat close to Yuki, sometimes whispering to each other, sometimes just staring silently at the busy aid station. Around 3 o'clock, a white officer approached them. He wore lieutenant's bars and carried a clipboard. His face was tired and impatient. "Coleman," he said, barely glancing at Isaiah. "These the Jap women you brought in?" Isaiah stood quickly. "Yes, sir, Lieutenant." "Harper." The man finally looked at Isaiah, his gaze cool. "I'm handling prisoner interrogation. You speak their language?" Isaiah shook his head. "No, sir." "Figured as much." Harper turned to the women. "You," he said loudly, pointing at Hana, who seemed the least injured. "You speak English?" Hana stared at him blankly. Harper sighed and tried again, speaking slowly and loudly, as if volume could bridge the language gap. "Do you understand me?" The women exchanged glances. Hana shook her head slightly. Harper turned back to Isaiah. "Great. This is going to be a real productive conversation." He squatted down in front of the women and began asking questions anyway, pointing at objects and saying the English words, then waiting for them to respond. The women looked confused and frightened. When Harper pointed to a nearby artillery piece and said "gun" in an accusatory tone, the women shrank back. Harper's face hardened. "I think they're spies," he said to Isaiah, not bothering to lower his voice. "Gathering intel on our positions." Isaiah frowned. "Sir, they were in a collapsed schoolhouse. One has a crushed leg. I don't think—" "You don't think what, Coleman?" Harper's voice took on a dangerous edge. Isaiah chose his next words carefully. "I don't think they're in any condition to be spies, sir. The one with the bad leg couldn't even walk." Harper studied him for a moment. "You seem awfully concerned about their welfare." "I'm a medic, sir." Harper made a note on his clipboard. "And how exactly did you communicate with them to bring them here if you don't speak Japanese?" "I didn't need to, sir. They were injured. I pointed to my medic badge. They followed me." "Just like that? Japanese civilians willingly followed a black American soldier?" The emphasis Harper placed on the word black made his skepticism clear. They were scared, sir. Injured. They didn't have much choice. Harper looked back at the women, who were watching the exchange with wary eyes. They don't look that scared of you now. I treated their wounds, sir. I think they understand I'm trying to help. Harper stood up. Well, they'll be someone else's problem soon enough. We're moving all wounded north tomorrow. POWs too. He gave Isaiah a hard look. You seem to have established some rapport with them. You'll escort them to the northern aid station. Yes, sir, Isaiah replied. It wasn't like he had a choice. Harper walked away, leaving Isaiah standing awkwardly in front of the women. They looked at him questioningly. I don't know what's going to happen to you, he said, even though they couldn't understand. But I'll try to keep you safe as long as I can. Yuki was watching him intently. Medic, she said again, softly. Good. Isaiah looked away, uncomfortable with her trust. She didn't understand how complicated things were, how dangerous her gratitude could be for both of them. Rest now, he said, gesturing for them to lie down. Tomorrow will be a long day. As evening fell, a cool breeze swept across the aid station. Fires were lit in metal drums, providing warmth and light as darkness closed in. Isaiah sat near the women, his rifle across his knees. He hadn't been relieved of duty all day, hadn't eaten since morning. The women dozed fitfully beside him, exhaustion finally overcoming fear and pain. Isaiah watched them sleep, thinking about his mother back in Georgia. What would she think of him now, guarding Japanese women on an island he hadn't known existed before the war? She'd always told him to help those in need, regardless of who they were. But she'd also warned him about the dangers of being too helpful to the wrong people at the wrong time. You always have to read the room, Isaiah, she'd say. Know when helping might hurt you more than it helps them. Movement caught his eye. A white sergeant was walking unsteadily toward them, a metal cup in his hand. Even from a distance, Isaiah could tell the man was drunk. The sergeant stopped in front of them, swaying slightly. Isaiah could smell the sharp tang of alcohol. So these are the Jap girls, the sergeant slurred, looking down at the sleeping women. Don't look like much. Isaiah said nothing. The sergeant, Miller according to the name on his uniform, took a swig from his cup and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Heard you carried one of them all the way from the village, Miller said, eyes narrowing. That right, boy? She couldn't walk, Sergeant, Isaiah replied neutrally. Her leg is crushed, Miller grunted. Awful considerate of you. He nudged Yuki with the toe of his boot. She woke with a start, eyes wide with fear. Leave her alone, Isaiah said before he could stop himself. She's injured. Miller turned to him slowly, eyes hard in the firelight. What did you say to me, boy? Isaiah stood, careful to keep his rifle pointed away from the sergeant. I said she's injured, Sergeant. She needs rest. And I need to know if these women are hiding anything, Miller replied, his words slightly slurred. They could have intel, weapons. They've been searched, Sergeant. They're just civilians. Miller stepped closer to Isaiah. You telling me how to do my job? No, Sergeant. Because it sounds like you are. Miller's breath reeked of cheap liquor. Sounds like you're awful protective of these enemy women. Behind them, all three women were awake now, watching the confrontation with wide, frightened eyes. I'm just following orders, Sergeant, Isaiah said quietly. Lieutenant Harper told me to guard them. Miller laughed, a harsh sound in the gathering darkness. Guard them, not mother them. He glanced at the crude bandages and splints Isaiah had fashioned. Looks like you've been playing nurse. Isaiah said nothing. There was no right answer here. Miller took another drink, then leaned in closer. You know what happens to Jap prisoners, don't you, boy? Isaiah kept his face impassive, though a cold feeling settled in his stomach. They don't all make it to the POW camps, Miller continued, his voice low. Accidents happen, especially to the women. Isaiah's hand tightened on his rifle. He knew what Miller was implying. He'd heard rumors about what happened to some female prisoners. Not often, but enough that the threat carried weight. Lieutenant Harper is expecting them at the northern aid station tomorrow, Isaiah said. All three of them. Miller's eyes narrowed. You threatening me, boy? No, Sergeant, just stating a fact. For a tense moment, the two men stared at each other. Then Miller spat on the ground near Isaiah's boot. You watch yourself, Coleman. War does funny things to men, makes them forget their place. He glanced at the women again. These Jap girls will get what's coming to them, one way or another. And if you get in the way, you will too. With that, he turned and walked unsteadily back toward the mess tent, where raucous laughter and the clinking of metal cups suggested more drinking was underway. Isaiah sat back down, his heart pounding harder than it did during artillery barrages. The women were looking at him with questions in their eyes. It's okay, he said, not knowing if it was true. You're safe for tonight. After a moment, he stood and gathered some broken wooden crates from nearby. Using pieces of rope and his knife, he constructed a better shelter for the women, one that would shield them from view as well as from the weather. The women watched him work silently. When he finished, he gestured for them to move inside. They did, huddling together in the small space. Sleep, Isaiah said, miming the action. I'll be right here. As darkness settled fully over the camp, Isaiah kept his eyes open and his rifle close. Some dangers came from the enemy. Others wore the same uniform he did. Dawn broke cold and clear, the air sharp with the scent of dew and distant smoke. Isaiah had dozed off and on through the night, always keeping one eye on the makeshift shelter where the women slept. Miller hadn't returned, but Isaiah wasn't naive enough to think the threat had passed. As light spread across the aid station, people began to stir. Field cooks banged pots at the mess tent. Medics checked on the wounded. Trucks rumbled at the perimeter, getting ready for the day's movements. Isaiah stood and stretched, his back stiff from sitting up all night. He needed to find food for the women before they set out for the northern aid station. He glanced toward the mess tent, wondering if he dared leave his post. Just then, another black soldier approached, carrying 2 metal trays of food. Isaiah recognized him immediately. Lewis, a supply clerk from his unit. Thought you might be hungry, Lewis said, handing Isaiah one of the trays. Been sitting here all night, from what I heard. Thanks, Isaiah said gratefully. The tray held powdered eggs, a piece of bread, and a cup of coffee. Nothing special, but it felt like a feast after his long vigil. Lewis glanced at the shelter where the women were beginning to stir. These the Jap women everyone's talking about? Isaiah nodded, his mouth full of eggs. White boys are all worked up about it, Lewis said quietly. Saying you're protecting Jap girls. Getting too close. Isaiah swallowed. They're just injured civilians. I'm following orders. Lewis shrugged. You know how it is. They'll make it into whatever story they want to tell. He pulled something from his pocket. 3 small rolls wrapped in a napkin. Swiped these from the kitchen. Figured they might be hungry too. Isaiah gave him a grateful look. Thanks, Lewis. Don't mention it. Lewis glanced around, then lowered his voice. Watch yourself today. That Sergeant, Miller, was running his mouth last night, saying things about you and these women. What kind of things? The kind that could get you in serious trouble. Lewis's face was grim. Just be careful, Isaiah. Some of these white boys are looking for any excuse. Isaiah nodded, understanding all too well. We're moving north today, Lieutenant's orders. Good. Get them away from here. Lewis hesitated. Just don't get too attached, man. They're still the enemy, even if they are women. I know what I'm doing, Isaiah said, more confidently than he felt. Lewis gave him a skeptical look, but didn't press the issue. I better get back before they notice I'm gone. Good luck. After Lewis left, Isaiah approached the shelter. The women were awake, sitting close together. They watched him warily as he held out the rolls. Food, he said, miming eating. They hesitated. Then Hana reached out and took the rolls. She distributed them, giving the largest piece to Yuki. Isaiah sat a short distance away and finished his own breakfast, giving the women privacy to eat. When he glanced back, he saw they had each taken tiny bites of their rolls, clearly trying to make the meager meal last. He felt a pang of sympathy. These women were so far from home, injured and afraid in the middle of a war zone. Whatever Japan had done in this war, these three hadn't been the ones giving orders or invading countries. A commotion near the command tent drew his attention. Officers were gathered, pointing at maps. Trucks were being loaded with wounded soldiers. The evacuation to the northern aid station was beginning. Lieutenant Harper spotted Isaiah and walked over, his face set in its usual impatient expression. "Coleman, get these prisoners ready to move. We're heading out in 30 minutes. "Yes, sir," Isaiah replied. "What about transportation for the injured one? She can't walk." Harper glanced at Yuki, who was watching them with dark, wary eyes. "Trucks are full with our wounded. She'll have to manage or you'll have to carry her again." Isaiah nodded, unsurprised. Enemy civilians would be the last priority for transport. "Yes, sir," he said. "We'll be ready." After Harper left, Isaiah turned to the women. He pointed to himself, then to them, then to the north. "We're moving," he said, making walking motions with his fingers. The women exchanged glances. Aiko and Hana nodded. Yuki looked down at her crushed leg, her face falling. Isaiah knelt beside her. "I'll carry you," he said, pointing to himself, then making a lifting motion. Like before. Yuki looked at him uncertainly, then gave a small nod. "Arigato," she whispered. Isaiah helped the women prepare as best he could. He gave Yuki another dose of morphine, knowing she would need it for the journey. He adjusted Aiko's splint and checked Hana's head wound, which was healing nicely. As he worked, he was acutely aware of eyes on him, white soldiers watching, judging. The women seemed to notice too. They kept their heads down, their movements small and careful. In the distance, artillery boomed, a reminder that while they prepared to move away from the front, the war continued its relentless grind. By midday, they were on the move. A long convoy of trucks, jeeps, and walking soldiers stretched along the muddy road leading north. The wounded rode in the backs of trucks or ambulances. Those who could walk did so, their boots squelching in the mud. Isaiah walked at the edge of the road, Yuki on his back, her arms wrapped loosely around his neck, her slight weight balanced as comfortably as possible. Hana and Aiko walked beside them, staying close. All three women kept their eyes down, avoiding the stares of the passing soldiers. The road had turned to sludge after last night's rain. Each step was an effort, Isaiah's boots sinking ankle-deep into the mud. Sweat ran down his face despite the cool air. Every now and then, a truck or jeep would pass, spattering them with mud. The white drivers rarely slowed down. Once, Isaiah had to jump to the side of the road to avoid being hit, nearly losing his balance with Yuki on his back. "You okay?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder at her. Yuki didn't understand the words, but she seemed to grasp the concern in his tone. "Hi," she replied softly. Yes, they had been walking for about an hour when a jeep slowed beside them. Isaiah tensed, expecting trouble, but it was just a young white lieutenant he didn't recognize. "You need a ride, soldier?" the lieutenant asked. Then his eyes fell on the women. "Oh, these are the, he trailed off. "Civilian prisoners, sir," Isaiah supplied. "This one has a crushed leg." The lieutenant looked uncomfortable. "Right, well, sorry, but I can't, that is, I'm on an urgent errand." He didn't meet Isaiah's eyes as he accelerated away, leaving them in a spray of mud. Isaiah sighed and kept walking. He hadn't expected anything different. Behind him, he heard Aiko and Hana whispering to each other. Then Hana spoke a little louder, clearly intending for Yuki to hear. Isaiah couldn't understand the words, but he caught the tone, sad, almost pitying. Yuki replied, her voice soft against Isaiah's ear. There was a pause, and then all three women fell silent. Isaiah wondered what they had said. Something about him, clearly. Perhaps they were finally understanding the strange, cruel hierarchy of the American Army. How a man could be called to save lives and still be treated as less than human because of the color of his skin. The convoy stretched ahead of them for at least a mile. They were near the back, with only a few stragglers behind them. The road curved around a hill, temporarily blocking the view ahead. As they rounded the curve, Isaiah's foot slipped in a particularly deep patch of mud. He stumbled, dropping to one knee. Yuki gasped as she was jostled. "Sorry," Isaiah muttered, struggling to regain his footing in the slippery mud. A group of white soldiers walked past, some glancing at them with curiosity or contempt. One slowed down. "Need a hand?" he asked, not unkindly. Isaiah shook his head. "I've got it. Thanks." The soldier shrugged and moved on, but not before giving the Japanese women a hard look. Isaiah pretended not to notice. With effort, he pushed himself back up to standing, adjusting Yuki's weight on his back. Her breath came in small, pained gasps. The morphine was wearing off. "Hang in there," he said, though he knew she couldn't understand. "Not much farther." That was a lie, of course. The Northern Aid Station was still miles away. But sometimes a comforting lie was all you had to offer. They kept walking, one mud-sucking step after another. The sun moved slowly across the sky. Occasionally, aircraft roared overhead, American planes heading toward Japanese positions. The distant thunder of artillery continued, a constant reminder of the war they were all caught in. Dusk was falling when the convoy finally stopped for the night. They hadn't reached the Northern Aid Station yet. It was still several miles away, but darkness made the muddy roads too dangerous for the trucks carrying wounded. The officers ordered everyone to make camp in and around an abandoned Okinawan farmhouse just off the road. The farmhouse itself was small, with a thatched roof and walls made of wood and clay. It would shelter some of the wounded. Everyone else would sleep outside. Isaiah lowered Yuki carefully to the ground near the edge of the camp. Her face was drawn with pain, her skin clammy. The journey had been hard on her. Hana and Aiko immediately sat beside her, murmuring softly in Japanese. A corpsman walked by, distributing rations to the soldiers. When he reached Isaiah and the women, he hesitated. "These the Jap prisoners?" he asked, eyeing them warily. "Yes," Isaiah replied. "They need food and water." The corpsman looked uncertain. "I don't know if I'm supposed to—" "Lieutenant Harper's orders," Isaiah lied smoothly. "They're to be kept alive until we reach the Northern Aid Station for interrogation." The corpsman seemed to accept this. He handed Isaiah 4 small packets of K-rations and 4 canteens. "Make it last," he said. "We're not sure when the next supply truck is coming through." "Thank you," Isaiah said, genuinely grateful. After the corpsman left, Isaiah distributed the food and water to the women. They took it with small nods of thanks, their movements still cautious and contained. As darkness settled over the camp, campfires sprang up here and there. Isaiah gathered some scraps of wood and built a small fire for their group, careful to keep it low and controlled. No sense drawing attention. The women ate silently, huddled close to the fire. Isaiah sat a short distance away, giving them space while still keeping watch. All around them, soldiers talked, smoked, and tried to find comfortable spots to sleep. After they had eaten, Isaiah checked Yuki's leg. The splint was holding, but the leg itself looked worse, swollen and discolored. She needed real medical attention soon. As he worked, Yuki watched his face. "America?" she asked suddenly, surprising him. Isaiah looked up. "Yes, I'm from America." She shook her head slightly. "You, home, America." Isaiah realized she was asking about his home in America. She was curious about him. "Georgia," he said. "I'm from Georgia, in the South." The word meant nothing to her, of course, but she seemed to want him to continue. Isaiah sat back on his heels. "It's hot there, hotter than here, lots of pine trees, red clay soil." He wasn't sure why he was telling her this, but it felt good to talk about home, even to someone who couldn't understand most of it. "Family?" Yuki asked, the English word sounding strange with her accent. Isaiah nodded. "Mother, 3 sisters. Father died when I was young." "Family." Yuki pointed to herself. "Hiroshima." Isaiah didn't know where Hiroshima was in Japan, but he nodded. "Your family is in Hiroshima?" "Hi." She looked down at her hands. Isaiah wondered if she was worried about them. Of course she was. just as his mother worried about him. After war, Yuki said haltingly. You go home? The question caught Isaiah off guard. It was something he thought about often, but rarely discussed. Would going home after the war be a relief, or just a return to a different kind of battlefield? Yes, he said finally. After the war, I go home. Good, Yuki said, but her eyes searched his face, perhaps sensing his hesitation. Isaiah looked away. How could he explain to her that he sometimes feared returning to Georgia more than he feared the Japanese army? How the rules and dangers there were different but no less real. America, he started, then stopped, not sure how to continue. How to explain Jim Crow laws, segregation, and the daily humiliations of being a black man in the South to someone who barely spoke English. But maybe she understood more than he thought. After all, she had seen how the white soldiers treated him. She had witnessed the hierarchy firsthand. I help people, he said finally, pointing to his medic armband. That's what I want to do, back home. Help people who are sick or hurt. Yuki nodded slowly. Good, she said again, but this time, her eyes held something like understanding. In the distance, a Jeep engine roared to life, the sound cutting through the quiet murmur of the camp. Isaiah tensed, suddenly alert. The headlights swept across the farmhouse as the Jeep approached, illuminating the groups of soldiers settled for the night. Isaiah stood up, a sense of unease growing in his gut. The Jeep stopped at the edge of the camp. In the dim light, Isaiah could make out 3 figures sitting in it. One of them stood up. Coleman, a voice called out. I know you're out there. Isaiah recognized the voice immediately. Sergeant Miller. Go inside, he whispered urgently to the women, pointing to the small shed at the edge of the property. Hide. They didn't understand his words, but his tone was clear enough. Hana and Aiko helped Yuki to her feet, and they hobbled quickly toward the shed. Isaiah turned to face the approaching Jeep, his heart pounding in his chest. Whatever was coming, he would face it, standing up. The Jeep's headlights blinded him as it drove closer, the engine growling in the darkness like some predatory animal that had finally found its prey. Isaiah stood his ground as the Jeep's headlights blinded him. The engine growled to a stop, and 3 figures climbed out. Even in the dim light, there was no mistaking Sergeant Miller's bulky frame. There you are, Miller called, his words slightly slurred. He was drunk again. Been looking all over for you. 2 other white soldiers flanked him, their faces hidden in shadow. They hung back as Miller approached Isaiah. Where are they? Miller demanded, looking around. Where are those Jap women? Isaiah kept his face neutral. They're resting, Sergeant. Lieutenant Harper ordered me to watch them. Miller stepped closer, his breath reeking of cheap alcohol. Don't play dumb with me, boy. I saw you build them that little shelter. Getting mighty comfortable with the enemy, aren't you? Behind Isaiah, the small shed where the women were hiding remained dark and silent. He silently prayed they would stay there. Just following orders, Sergeant, Isaiah said evenly. Miller laughed, a harsh sound in the quiet night. Orders? No. I think you've got other reasons. He looked Isaiah up and down. I've seen how you look at that little one. The one with the bad leg. Isaiah's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Miller turned to his companions. See what I mean? These colored boys, they can't help themselves. First chance they get near any woman. He let the implication hang in the air. One of the soldiers chuckled nervously. Miller turned back to Isaiah, his expression hardening. Where are they? He repeated. They're prisoners, Sergeant. They're supposed to be delivered to the Northern Aid Station tomorrow. Miller stepped even closer, now just inches from Isaiah's face. I didn't ask what they are. I asked where they are. And you're going to tell me, or... Is there a problem here, Sergeant? The new voice cut through the tension. A white officer, a captain from the look of his silhouette, approached from the direction of the farmhouse. Miller straightened up, trying to look sober. No, sir. Just checking on the prisoners. The captain, his name tag read Reynolds, looked between Isaiah and Miller. "It's late, Sergeant, and you seem to have had quite a bit to drink." His tone was neutral but firm. "I suggest you return to your quarters." Now, Miller's face darkened, but he nodded stiffly. "Yes, sir." As Miller turned to leave, he bumped Isaiah's shoulder hard. "This isn't over," he muttered, low enough that only Isaiah could hear. The three men climbed back into the Jeep, which roared away into the darkness, leaving a cloud of dust behind it. Captain Reynolds watched it go, then turned to Isaiah. "Those are the Japanese prisoners you brought in?" "Yes, sir. One has a crushed leg. They're civilians." Reynolds nodded. "Lieutenant Harper mentioned them." He studied Isaiah's face. "What was that about, with Sergeant Miller?" Isaiah hesitated. Complaining about a white sergeant to a white captain wasn't likely to end well for him. "Just a disagreement about duty assignments, sir," he said finally. Reynolds didn't look convinced, but he didn't press the issue. "Well, get some rest, soldier. You'll need it for the march tomorrow." After the captain walked away, Isaiah waited several minutes to make sure Miller wasn't coming back. Then he went to the shed. "It's safe now," he said softly, opening the door. The women were huddled together in the dark corner. They looked up at him with frightened eyes. Yuki's face was pale with pain. Isaiah helped them out of the shed and back to their small campfire, which had almost died. He added some wood, careful to keep the flames low. "That man," Yuki said in halting English. "He bad?" Isaiah nodded. "Yes, bad." Her dark eyes studied his face. "Why? He hate you?" The question caught him off guard. How could he explain American racism to someone who barely spoke the language? How could he tell her that Miller hated him not just because he was helping Japanese women, but because of the color of his skin? "It's complicated," Isaiah said simply. Yuki seemed to understand more than her limited English suggested. She nodded slowly. "We go tomorrow?" she asked. "Yes, tomorrow." But as Isaiah settled back to keep watch for the rest of the night, he wondered if it would be safe to wait until morning. Miller would be back. He was sure of it. There might not be a captain around to intervene. Isaiah didn't sleep. He sat with his back against a tree, watching the dying embers of the fire and listening to the night sounds of the camp. Most soldiers were asleep now, but occasional voices or the clank of equipment broke the silence. The women dozed fitfully. Yuki's face was drawn with pain even in sleep. The morphine had worn off long ago, and Isaiah dared not give her more until absolutely necessary. His supplies were limited. As the eastern sky began to lighten, Isaiah made his decision. They couldn't wait for the official convoy to move out. Miller would find a way to get to them. He gently shook Hana awake. "We need to go," he whispered, miming walking with his fingers. Her eyes widened in understanding. She nodded and woke Aiko. Isaiah gathered their few belongings, some extra bandages, the canteens of water, and the remaining K-rations. He helped Yuki sit up, her face contorting as her leg shifted. "I'm sorry," he murmured, knowing she couldn't understand his words but would hear the regret in his voice. In the gray pre-dawn light, they moved quietly away from the farmhouse. Isaiah carried Yuki on his back again, her arms wrapped weakly around his neck, her breath warm against his ear. They followed a narrow path that wound through a grove of pine trees east of the camp. Isaiah had noticed it yesterday when they arrived. It seemed to parallel the main road, but stayed hidden in the trees. The path was rough and overgrown in places. Isaiah's boots slipped on wet leaves, and low branches scratched at his face. Hana and Aiko followed silently, occasionally helping each other over fallen logs or through tangles of underbrush. After about an hour of slow progress, the path emerged from the trees near a rocky outcropping. Isaiah stopped, letting Yuki slide carefully from his back onto a flat rock. He pulled out a canteen and gave her a drink. Hana and Aiko sank down beside her, breathing hard. None of them were in good shape for this kind of journey. Days of limited food and water, plus their injuries, had weakened them significantly. "Rest," Isaiah said, pointing to the ground. 5 minutes. The women nodded gratefully. Isaiah climbed the outcropping to get a better view of their surroundings. The main road was visible about half a mile to their right, winding through the valley. In the distance ahead, he could see what looked like a small collection of tents, possibly a supply depot or checkpoint. They could reach it by midday if they kept moving. Behind them, the farmhouse where they'd spent the night was hidden by the trees. No sign of pursuit yet. But Isaiah knew it wouldn't take Miller long to realize they were gone once the camp woke up. He climbed back down to the women. "We need to keep moving," he said, gesturing ahead. Yuki looked up at him, her dark eyes clouded with pain and exhaustion. "Sorry," she whispered. "For what?" Isaiah asked, though he knew she couldn't understand. She pointed to her crushed leg, then to him. "You carry hard." Isaiah shook his head. "Don't be sorry. This isn't your fault." Yuki looked down. "War, all fault." That Isaiah understood perfectly. This war had taken so much from everyone, American, Japanese, Okinawan. None of the people suffering in the mud and blood had started it, yet here they all were, paying the price. He helped her onto his back again, and they continued along the path. The morning sun rose higher, burning off the mist that had settled in the valley. It would be a hot day. Isaiah set a steady pace, trying to conserve his strength. Carrying Yuki was getting harder, but he couldn't bring himself to complain. Not when she was enduring such pain without a word. Around mid-morning, they heard the rumble of engines. Isaiah signaled for everyone to freeze. Through a break in the trees, they saw a convoy of trucks passing on the main road. "American," Isaiah said, pointing. The women tensed. "Bad?" Hannah asked. Isaiah shook his head. "Not all bad, but he didn't move to the road. Right now, any American soldiers could mean trouble." They waited until the convoy passed, then continued on their way, staying under the cover of the trees. By late morning, they reached the outskirts of what turned out to be a small supply depot. American flags flew over a cluster of tents and temporary buildings. A few trucks were parked in a cleared area, and soldiers moved among them, loading and unloading supplies. Isaiah found a sheltered spot among some rocks where the women could rest while he scouted ahead. "Stay here," he said, helping Yuki sit against a boulder. "I'll be back." The women nodded, too exhausted to argue. Isaiah approached the depot cautiously. He kept his Red Cross armband visible, hoping it would prevent anyone from shooting at him on sight. A young white corporal spotted him first. "Hold it right there." "Boo!" he called, raising his rifle. Isaiah stopped and raised his hands. "Medic," he called, "from the 93rd, coming in from the South Convoy." The corporal lowered his rifle slightly, advanced slowly. Isaiah did as he was told. As he got closer, he could see the corporal was barely more than a kid, maybe 19 or 20. "What are you doing out here alone?" the corporal asked. "Not alone," Isaiah replied truthfully. "I've got 3 injured civilians with me, Japanese women. We got separated from the convoy." The corporal's eyes widened. "Japanese? Are they prisoners?" "Yes. They need water and rest. One has a badly injured leg." The corporal hesitated, clearly unsure what to do. Then an older soldier approached, another corporal, but with a weathered face that suggested years of service. "What's going on, Jenkins?" the older man asked. The young corporal, Jenkins, explained the situation. The older man looked at Isaiah with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "These women POWs?" he asked. Isaiah nodded. "Civilians. Found them in a collapsed building. Lieutenant Harper ordered me to escort them to the Northern Aid Station." The older corporal studied Isaiah's face, then seemed to make a decision. "All right, bring them in. But they stay at the edge of camp, understand? And you're responsible for them." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." Isaiah went back to the rocks and helped the women to their feet. Yuki grimaced as he lifted her onto his back again. "Almost there," he promised her. They entered the small depot cautiously. A few soldiers stared at them, but most were too busy with their own tasks to pay much attention. Corporal Jenkins led them to an empty tent at the edge of the depot. "You can rest here," he said. "I'll bring some water." The inside of the tent was bare except for a few empty crates. Isaiah helped Yuki sit on one of them, then did the same for Hana and Aiko. Jenkins returned with 3 canteens of fresh water and a small first aid kit. "Best I could do," he said, handing them to Isaiah. "Cook might have some extra rations later." "Thank you," Isaiah said, genuinely grateful. After Jenkins left, Isaiah checked the women's injuries. Hana's head wound was healing well. Aiko's broken arm seemed stable in its crude splint. But Yuki's leg worried him. The splint he'd made was holding, but the leg itself looked worse, more swollen, the skin turning an angry purple black in places. She needed a real doctor, and soon. He cleaned the wounds as best he could with the supplies Jenkins had provided, then gave each woman some water. "Rest now," he told them. "We'll stay here tonight." The women settled onto the crates, exhaustion evident in every line of their bodies. Within minutes, Hana and Aiko were asleep, leaning against each other for support. But Yuki stayed awake, her dark eyes following Isaiah as he sorted through the meager supplies. "Why?" she asked suddenly. Isaiah looked up, surprised. "Why what?" She gestured to herself, then to him. "Why help?" It was a good question. Why was he risking so much for these women? They were supposed to be the enemy, and helping them had already put him in danger with his own people. "Because it's right," he said simply. Yuki watched his face. American, soldier, Japanese. She touched her chest. Enemy. Isaiah shook his head. "Not you. You're just women caught in a war. Same as my sisters would be if the fighting was in Georgia." "Georgia?" she repeated, the word strange on her tongue. "My home," Isaiah explained, though he knew she couldn't understand. "Far from here." Yuki nodded slowly, as if she understood something deeper than his words. "Home," she repeated. "All want go home." Corporal Jenkins was hurrying toward their tent, his young face worried. "Coleman," he called as he got closer. "Radio message just came in. They're looking for you and 3 Japanese women. Some sergeant named Miller says you've gone AWOL with prisoners." Isaiah's heart sank. "We haven't gone AWOL. We're following Lieutenant Harper's orders to get them to the Northern Aid Station." Jenkins looked skeptical. "That's not what the message said." He lowered his voice. "Look, I don't know what's going on, but that sergeant sounded real mad. Said you'd be court-martialed when they found you." Isaiah glanced back at the women. Yuki was watching him, her face tense, as if she sensed the danger even without understanding the words. "How long can we stay here?" Isaiah asked. Jenkins shrugged. "Supply truck heading north in the morning. You could hitch a ride." "But if they're looking for you specifically..." He let the implication hang in the air. Isaiah nodded. "Thanks for the warning." After Jenkins left, Isaiah sat heavily on a crate. Miller was coming for them, just as he'd feared. And now he was being accused of going AWOL, a serious charge that could lead to court-martial or worse. "Bad news?" Yuki asked quietly. Isaiah looked up, surprised again at her perceptiveness. "Yes," he admitted. "Bad news." Yuki's face set in a determined expression. "We go? Now?" Isaiah shook his head. "No, rest first. We'll go before dawn." She nodded, accepting his decision. Then, surprising him further, she reached out and touched his hand lightly. "Thank you, for all." Isaiah pulled his hand away gently, aware of how it would look if someone walked in, but he couldn't help a small smile. "You're welcome," he said. Outside, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the supply depot. In a few hours, they would have to move again, but for now, they had shelter, water, and a moment of peace. Isaiah leaned back against the tent pole, allowing himself to close his eyes, just for a minute, just to rest. Isaiah woke with a start. Light was filtering through the canvas of the tent, not the gray of pre-dawn, but the golden glow of early morning. He had slept through the night. Panic shot through him. They should have left hours ago. He looked around quickly. The women were still there, huddled together on the crates. Yuki was awake, watching him with those intent dark eyes. "Morning," she said softly. Isaiah stood, wincing at the stiffness in his back. "We need to go," he said urgently. gathering their few supplies. Just then, the tent flap opened. Corporal Jenkins stuck his head in. "You're still here," he said, looking relieved. "Thought you might have left in the night." "Overslept," Isaiah admitted. "We need to move. Now." Jenkins nodded. "Supply trucks leaving in 20 minutes. North to the main aid station. Driver owes me a favor. He'll take you." He lowered his voice. "Another radio message came in an hour ago. That's Sergeant. He's on his way here. With MPs." Isaiah felt a chill. Military police meant serious trouble. "Thank you," he said to Jenkins, "for everything." The young corporal shrugged. "Just doing what's right." He glanced at the women. "They don't look like the enemy to me. Just scared folks." He handed Isaiah a small package wrapped in waxed paper. "Breakfast. Not much, but it's something." After Jenkins left, Isaiah unwrapped the package. Inside were 4 thick slices of bread and some dried meat. He divided it among the women and himself, urging them to eat quickly. "We're leaving soon," he told them, miming driving a truck. They ate silently, too hungry to waste time talking. When they finished, Isaiah helped them to their feet. Yuki winced as she tried to put weight on her injured leg. Isaiah moved to lift her, but she held up a hand. "Wait," she said. She pointed to a broken wooden crate in the corner of the tent. With gestures and broken English, she indicated that she wanted part of it. Isaiah understood. He broke off a straight piece about 3 feet long, then helped her balance with it under her arm, like a crude crutch. She took a tentative step, gasping with pain, but staying upright. Then another step. It clearly hurt terribly, but a look of fierce determination crossed her face. "Good?" Isaiah asked. Yuki nodded, sweat beading on her forehead. "Good. I walk. You not carry." Isaiah wasn't sure she could manage, but he admired her courage. "We'll try," he agreed, "but if it's too much—" "I walk," she insisted. Hana and Aiko looked concerned, but they didn't argue. Perhaps they understood Yuki's pride, her need to stand on her own, even with a crushed leg. They left the tent to find Corporal Jenkins waiting with a canvas-covered supply truck. The driver, a middle-aged private with a weathered face, eyed them suspiciously, but said nothing. "This is Coleman and the, civilians I mentioned," Jenkins told the driver. "They need to get to the northern aid station." The driver shrugged. "Get in the back. Stay quiet. Far as I know, I never saw you." Isaiah helped the women climb into the back of the truck. It was half filled with crates of supplies, leaving just enough room for them to sit. Yuki bit her lip to keep from crying out as Isaiah lifted her over the tailgate. "Thank you," Isaiah said to Jenkins one last time. The young corporal nodded. "Good luck." He glanced over his shoulder nervously. "Better get moving. Road's not great. About 3 hours to the aid station if nothing goes wrong." The truck engine roared to life. Isaiah settled in the back with the women as the vehicle began to move, bouncing over the rough road. Through a gap in the canvas, Isaiah watched the supply depot grow smaller behind them. They had escaped, for now. But Miller was still coming, and 3 hours was a long time for something to go wrong. Inside the dim truck, Yuki leaned against a crate, her face tight with pain, but also showing relief. She had walked on her own, if only for a few steps. It was something. "Truck? Safe?" she asked, raising her voice above the engine noise. Isaiah wasn't sure how to answer. The truck was faster than walking, yes, but it was also taking them directly to a larger American base, where Miller could easily find them. And being found in the back of a supply truck without authorization would only strengthen the case against him. "Hope so," he said finally. Yuki seemed to read his uncertainty. She nodded gravely. "Hope," she repeated, as if testing the word. "Good word." The truck rumbled northward, following the winding coastal road. Through gaps in the canvas, Isaiah caught glimpses of the ocean, brilliantly blue under the morning sun, seeming impossibly peaceful compared to the war-torn island. After about an hour, the truck suddenly slowed, then stopped. Isaiah tensed, moving to peer through the canvas. They had reached a checkpoint. A few American soldiers were inspecting vehicles on the road. Routine, probably, but dangerous for them now. Isaiah could hear the driver talking to someone, his voice too low to make out the words. Then footsteps approached the back of the truck. "Stay still," Isaiah whispered to the women. Quiet. The tailgate creaked open, and sunlight flooded in. A young MP stood there, rifle in hand. His eyes widened when he saw them. "What the?" he began. Isaiah thought quickly. "Medical transport," he said, pointing to his medic's armband. "Injured civilians for interrogation at the Northern Aid Station. Lieutenant Harper's orders." The MP frowned. "Why aren't they in a proper transport?" "All full with wounded soldiers," Isaiah said, the half-truth coming easily. These were lower priority. The MP looked uncertain. He was young, probably new to his job. "Wait here," he said finally, closing the tailgate. Isaiah could hear him talking to someone else outside. His heart pounded in his chest. If they checked his story, they'd find out about Miller's accusations. After what seemed like an eternity, the tailgate opened again. The same MP stood there, along with an older officer, a lieutenant. "Let me see your orders, soldier," the lieutenant said. Isaiah's stomach sank. "Don't have written orders, sir. Lieutenant Harper sent us ahead to the Northern Aid Station yesterday. We got separated from the main convoy." The lieutenant's eyes narrowed. "Name and unit?" "Coleman, Isaiah, medic, 93rd Infantry Division." The lieutenant exchanged a glance with the MP. "Wait here," he said, and they both walked away. Yuki looked at Isaiah questioningly. He tried to keep his expression neutral, but she wasn't fooled. "Problem?" she asked softly. "Maybe," Isaiah admitted. Minutes ticked by. Isaiah could hear radio static, then muffled voices. They were checking his story, which meant they were about to find out about Miller's accusations. Finally, the lieutenant returned. His face was grim. "Step out of the truck, Coleman." Isaiah's heart sank. He climbed out slowly, helping each of the women down after him. Yuki leaned heavily on her makeshift crutch, her face pale with pain. "There's a situation," the lieutenant said once they were all standing on the road. "Sergeant Miller from your unit has reported you AWOL. Says you absconded with enemy prisoners." Isaiah kept his face carefully neutral. "That's not true, sir. I was ordered to escort East civilians to the Northern Aid Station. We got separated from the convoy. I'm following those orders." The lieutenant studied his face. Why would a sergeant make such an accusation? Isaiah hesitated. Telling the truth about Miller's threats and behavior could backfire badly, but lying wouldn't help either. "I believe Sergeant Miller has personal issues with me, sir," he said carefully, "and with how these prisoners are being treated." Understanding flickered in the lieutenant's eyes. Even without details, he seemed to grasp the underlying dynamics at play. He sighed. "Look, I don't know what's going on between you and this sergeant, but I've got orders to detain you if you came through this checkpoint." Isaiah nodded, resigned. "Yes, sir." "However," the lieutenant continued, glancing at the women, particularly at Yuki with her makeshift crutch, "these civilians clearly need medical attention, and the Northern Aid Station is the nearest facility equipped to handle them." He seemed to be making a decision. "The supply truck is continuing north. The civilians will go with it. You'll remain here until we sort this out." Isaiah felt a surge of relief, mixed with concern. At least the women would get the medical help they needed. But what would happen to them without him there to protect them? And what would happen to him once Miller arrived? "Sir," he began, "these women don't speak much English. They'll be frightened without." "That's not my concern," the lieutenant cut him off. "My orders are to detain you, not them." Isaiah looked at the women. Yuki was watching him with those dark, perceptive eyes. She seemed to understand what was happening. "Go?" she asked, pointing to the truck. Isaiah nodded. "You go. Hospital." He mimed a doctor examining her leg. Yuki shook her head. "You come." "I can't," Isaiah said gently. "Not yet." He helped them back into the truck, aware of the lieutenant and MP watching his every move. When he lifted Yuki, she clung to him a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," she whispered, "for all." Isaiah set her carefully on the truck bed. "You'll be okay now," he said, though he wasn't sure if it was true. "Doctors will help your leg." The driver climbed back into the cab, and the engine rumbled to life. Isaiah stepped back as the MP closed the tailgate. Through the canvas, he could see Yuki watching him, her face a mixture of gratitude and concern. Then the truck pulled away, heading north. "This way," the lieutenant said, gesturing toward a small tent beside the checkpoint. "We'll wait for Sergeant Miller here." Isaiah followed him, a hollow feeling in his stomach. He had kept his promise. The women were on their way to safety. But his own troubles were just beginning. Isaiah sat on a wooden crate inside the checkpoint tent, hands folded in his lap. Outside, soldiers moved back and forth, checking vehicles and paperwork. No one paid him much attention. He wasn't under guard, not officially, but there was nowhere for him to go. An hour passed, then another. The morning sun climbed higher, turning a tent into an oven. Sweat trickled down Isaiah's back, but he didn't move. Years in Georgia, then months on Okinawa, had taught him patience. He thought about the women, especially Yuki, with her crushed leg and determined eyes. By now, they should be nearing the northern aid station. Would they be treated well? Would anyone understand them, or would they simply be processed like objects and put somewhere until the war ended? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of an approaching jeep. The engine sounded angry, revving higher than necessary. Isaiah knew who it was before the vehicle even stopped. The tent flap opened, and the lieutenant who detained him stepped inside. "Sergeant Miller's here," he said, his tone neutral. "Says he's come to escort you back to your unit." Isaiah nodded. "Yes, sir." The lieutenant hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Look, I don't know what's between you two, but he seems worked up. Whatever happens, don't make it worse." "I understand, sir." The lieutenant nodded and stepped aside. Sergeant Miller ducked through the tent opening, his bulky frame filling the small space. His face was flushed, eyes bloodshot from drinking and lack of sleep. Behind him stood one of the MPs from the farmhouse. "Well, well," Miller drawled, looking Isaiah up and down, "if it isn't our wandering medic." Isaiah said nothing, keeping his face carefully blank. Miller turned to the lieutenant. "Thank you for detaining him, sir. Private Jenkins and I will take him back now." The lieutenant frowned slightly. "Where are your orders, Sergeant?" Miller's smile tightened. "Radio orders, sir. Lieutenant Harper wants him returned immediately for disciplinary action." "I see." The lieutenant still looked skeptical. "And the Japanese civilians?" "They're continuing to the aid station," Miller said smoothly. "Separate matter entirely." The lieutenant looked at Isaiah, then back at Miller. After a moment, he nodded. "Very well, Sergeant. He's all yours." As the lieutenant left the tent, Miller's fake smile vanished. He stepped closer to Isaiah, voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Thought you could run, didn't you? Thought you could take those Jap women and disappear?" "I was following Lieutenant Harper's orders," Isaiah replied evenly, "taking them to the northern aid station." Miller laughed, a harsh sound in the small tent. "That's your story? Strange how you left camp before dawn, without telling anyone. Strange how you happened to find a friendly driver to smuggle you north?" Isaiah said nothing. Arguing would only make things worse. Miller grabbed him by the arm, fingers digging in painfully. "Get up. We're going back to camp. Lieutenant Harper is very interested in hearing about your little adventure." Isaiah stood, towering over Miller by several inches. The sergeant didn't like that. Isaiah could see it in his eyes. He yanked Isaiah's arm, pulling him toward the tent flap. "Where are the women now?" Miller asked as they stepped outside into the blinding sunlight. "On their way to the aid station," Isaiah replied. "Lieutenant's orders." Miller's grip tightened. "Don't worry, we'll catch up to them soon enough." A chill ran down Isaiah's spine. Miller wasn't taking him back to camp. He was going after the women. The MP was waiting by a jeep, engine already running. Miller shoved Isaiah toward it. "Get in the back," he ordered. Isaiah hesitated, mind racing. If he resisted now in front of a dozen soldiers, he'd be shot or worse. But if he got in that jeep with Miller, a commotion near the road drew their attention. Another jeep was approaching the checkpoint at high speed, dust billowing behind it. "Hold up," someone called. The new Jeep skidded to a stop, and a familiar figure jumped out. Captain Reynolds from the farmhouse. He strode toward them, his face grim. "Sergeant Miller," he said, his voice cold. "Step away from that soldier." Miller's face darkened, but he let go of Isaiah's arm. "Sir, I know exactly what you were doing," Reynolds cut him off. "And it stops now." He turned to the checkpoint lieutenant, who had emerged from the tent. "Lieutenant Chan, I'm taking charge of this man." He nodded toward Isaiah. Lieutenant Chan looked confused, but nodded. "Yes, sir." Reynolds turned to Isaiah. "Those Japanese civilians made it to the aid station an hour ago. One of them, the one with the injured leg, managed to tell our translator about a bad sergeant who threatened them." He glanced at Miller. "And about a black medic who protected them." Miller's face had gone from red to white. "Sir, that's not—" "Save it, Sergeant," Reynolds snapped. "I've heard reports about you before. Drinking on duty, threatening prisoners." His eyes narrowed. "This time, you went too far." He turned to the MP standing by Miller's Jeep. "Private, escort Sergeant Miller back to camp. He is relieved of duty pending investigation." Miller's face contorted with rage. "You're taking the word of Jap women?" He stopped himself, but everyone knew what he'd been about to say. "One more word, Sergeant," Reynolds said quietly, "and I'll have you in cuffs." For a tense moment, Miller looked like he might explode. Then his shoulders slumped slightly. Without another word, he turned and walked to his Jeep, the MP following close behind. Reynolds watched them drive away, then turned to Isaiah. "Coleman, isn't it?" "Yes, sir." "You've had quite a morning. Let's get you to the aid station." "I think there are some people there who'd like to see you." Isaiah felt a wave of relief wash over him. "Thank you, sir." As they climbed into Reynolds' Jeep, the captain glanced at him. "Those women risked a lot to speak up for you. Especially the one with the bad leg. Yuki, I think she said her name was. Refused treatment until she told our translator what happened." Isaiah's throat tightened with emotion. After everything they'd been through, after all the fear and pain, Yuki had still found the courage to speak up for him. The Jeep pulled away from the checkpoint, heading north. Isaiah watched the landscape roll by, green hills, blue ocean, the endless sky above. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to hope that things might turn out all right after all. The northern aid station was much larger than the makeshift field hospital where they'd started. Proper tents lined up in neat rows, a mess hall, even a small landing strip for evacuation planes. It looked almost like a real military base, despite being temporary. Captain Reynolds parked the Jeep near the command tent and led Isaiah through the bustling camp. Wounded soldiers lay on cots under large medical tents. Doctors and nurses moved efficiently between them. No one paid much attention to Isaiah, just another soldier in a place full of them. "The women are in the civilian section," Reynolds explained as they walked. "Standard procedure is to keep them separate until intelligence officers can question them." Isaiah nodded. He'd expected as much. They approached a smaller tent set apart from the others, guarded by an MP. Reynolds showed his identification, and the guard let them pass. Inside, the tent was divided by canvas partitions. A young Japanese-American soldier sat at a small desk, writing in a notebook. He looked up as they entered. "Captain," he greeted Reynolds, standing quickly. "And this must be Coleman." "Corporal Tanaka," Reynolds replied. "Any change?" Tanaka shook his head. "The woman with the leg injury is in surgery now. Doctor says it's bad. Might lose it below the knee. The other two are resting." He gestured toward one of the partitions. "They've been asking about him." He nodded toward Isaiah. Reynolds turned to Isaiah. "You can see them, but keep it brief. They're still technically prisoners. And you're still under investigation, even if Sergeant Miller's accusations seem less credible now." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." Reynolds left, and Corporal Tanaka led Isaiah behind one of the partitions. There, sitting on simple cots, were Hana and Aiko. When they saw him, their faces lit up with relief. "Coleman-san," Hana said, bowing slightly from her seated position. "They're okay?" Isaiah asked Tanaka, nodding toward the women. "Minor injuries," Tanaka confirmed. The one with the head wound, Hana, Has a mild concussion but should be fine. Aiko's arm was set properly. They're more exhausted and malnourished than anything. Isaiah nodded. And Yuki? The one with the leg? Tanaka's expression sobered. In surgery. It doesn't look good. The doctor said the crush injury was too severe and infection has set in. They're trying to save as much as they can. Isaiah's stomach nodded. He'd feared as much, but hearing it confirmed made it real. They want to talk to you, Tanaka said, gesturing to the women. I'll translate. Isaiah approached the cots. Both women looked better than they had. Cleaner, with proper bandages. But their eyes held worry. Tell them I'm glad they're safe, Isaiah said to Tanaka. The corporal translated. The women nodded, then Hana spoke rapidly in Japanese. She says they were very afraid when you were not allowed to come with them, Tanaka translated. They thought the bad sergeant would hurt you. Tell them I'm fine. Captain Reynolds made sure of that. More translation. Then Aiko spoke, her voice soft but determined. She says you saved their lives, Tanaka relayed, not just from the building, but from the bad sergeant. They told the captain everything. How you gave them food and water from your own rations. How you carried Yuki when she couldn't walk. How you protected them when the sergeant came at night. Isaiah felt uncomfortable with the praise. I was just doing my job. When Tanaka translated this, both women shook their heads vigorously. Hana spoke again, more forcefully this time. She says no, it was more than duty. Many American soldiers would have left them to die. Some wanted to hurt them. You were kind when you had no reason to be. Isaiah didn't know how to respond to that. Kindness shouldn't be remarkable. It should be human nature. But war had a way of stripping humanity from everyone it touched. Ask about Yuki, he said to Tanaka. When will she be out of surgery? The corporal asked, but both women shook their heads. They didn't know. Just then, the tent flap opened, and Captain Reynolds returned. Coleman, he called, need you outside. Isaiah nodded to the women. Tell them I'll try to check on them later, he said to Tanaka. The corporal translated, and the women bowed slightly as Isaiah left. Outside, Reynolds looked troubled. Miller's back at camp, he said without preamble. He's filed formal charges against you. Dereliction of duty, insubordination, and mishandling of prisoners. Isaiah's heart sank. Sir, I was following Lieutenant Harper's orders to. Reynolds held up a hand. I know. And Harper confirms he did order you to escort the women north. But Miller claims you were unnecessarily familiar with them. That you provided them with extra rations, medical supplies intended for American soldiers, and generally showed preferential treatment. Isaiah kept his face carefully neutral. Sir, they were injured civilians. They needed medical attention. I understand that, Reynolds said. And personally, I believe you acted appropriately. But this is going to require a formal investigation now. Miller has too many friends in high places to ignore it. What happens next, sir? You'll remain here at the aid station for now, under restricted duty. No leaving camp, no contact with the prisoners except as specifically authorized. I've assigned you to assist in the medical tents. They can use another trained medic. Isaiah nodded. It could have been worse, much worse. Thank you, sir. Reynolds gave him a long look. These women spoke up for you at considerable risk to themselves. They didn't have to do that. Remember that, Coleman, when you start thinking all Japanese are the enemy. I will, sir. As Reynolds walked away, Isaiah stood for a moment, looking around the busy camp. A half-mile from where he stood, men were killing each other in brutal combat. Yet here, a black American soldier and 3 Japanese women had formed an unlikely alliance against hatred and cruelty. The world made no sense sometimes. For the next 2 days, Isaiah worked in the medical tents. The wounded came in endless waves, American, Japanese, and Okinawan civilians caught in the crossfire. Isaiah cleaned wounds, changed bandages, held water for the thirsty, and comforted the dying without distinction. Pain and fear looked the same on every face, regardless of language or uniform. During brief breaks, he asked about Yuki. On the second day, a nurse finally gave him news. The surgery had been successful in saving her life, but not her leg. Everything below the left knee was gone. The news hit Isaiah harder than he expected. He'd known it was likely, given the severity of her injury, but somehow he'd hoped for a miracle. Late that afternoon, as his shift ended, Captain Reynolds found him washing bloodstains from his hands. "How are you holding up?" the captain asked. Isaiah looked up, surprised by the question. Few white officers ever asked about his well-being. "Fine, sir. Keeping busy." Reynolds nodded. "You do good work," the doctors noticed. He hesitated, then added, "There's going to be a hearing tomorrow about Sergeant Miller's accusations." Isaiah's stomach tightened. "Yes, sir. I'll be presiding, along with 2 other officers. Miller will present his case, you'll present yours. We'll hear testimony from Lieutenant Harper and—" He paused. "The Japanese women have asked to testify as well." Isaiah looked up, startled. "Sir? Unusual, I know. But given the circumstances, I've decided to allow it. They were witnesses to everything that happened." Isaiah nodded, trying to process this. "What about Yuki? She's still recovering from surgery." "She's insistent," Reynolds said, his expression unreadable. "Says she'll come on crutches if she has to." Isaiah didn't know what to say. After everything Yuki had been through, losing her leg, enduring pain and fear in a foreign country, she was willing to face a room of American officers to speak for him. "The hearing will be at 0900 tomorrow," Reynolds continued. "Medical Tent 3 has been cleared for it. Get some rest, Coleman. Tomorrow won't be easy." After Reynolds left, Isaiah sat alone for a long time. His mind went back to Georgia, to his mother's small house with its worn floors and faded curtains. He remembered her words when he'd received his draft notice. "Remember who you are, Isaiah. War can turn men into animals if they let it. Don't you let it." Had he remembered? Had he remained human in the midst of inhumanity? He hoped so. Tomorrow would tell. That night, as Isaiah lay on his cot in the enlisted men's tent, he couldn't sleep. Around him, exhausted soldiers snored and muttered in their dreams. Some called out names: mothers, sweethearts, buddies who wouldn't be going home. Isaiah stared at the canvas above him, listening to the distant thump of artillery, and thinking about a small woman with determined eyes who had lost her leg but not her courage. Medical Tent 3 had been transformed for the hearing. Cots and equipment had been moved aside, replaced by a table where 3 officers sat. Captain Reynolds in the center, flanked by a major and a lieutenant Isaiah didn't recognize. Chairs faced the table, one for Isaiah, one for Miller, and several for witnesses. Isaiah arrived early, wearing his cleanest uniform. His hands felt clammy, his mouth dry. This wasn't a full court-martial, not yet, but it could easily lead to one. Miller arrived minutes later, escorted by an MP. He looked sober but angry, his face set in hard lines. He didn't look at Isaiah as he took his seat. Lieutenant Harper came next, looking uncomfortable. He nodded slightly to Isaiah. Not friendly exactly, but not hostile either. Then came the moment Isaiah had been both dreading and hoping for. The Japanese women entered the tent. Aiko and Hana walked slowly, supporting Yuki between them. She wore a hospital gown, her left leg ending abruptly below the knee, bandaged neatly. Her face was pale from pain and blood loss, but her eyes were clear and determined. Corporal Tanaka followed, carrying a chair for Yuki. He helped her sit, then positioned himself beside the women, ready to translate. Captain Reynolds called the hearing to order. "We're here to investigate charges brought by Sergeant James Miller against Medic Isaiah Coleman," he stated formally. "The charges are dereliction of duty, insubordination, and mishandling of enemy prisoners." He turned to Miller. "Sergeant, present your case." Miller stood, his posture stiff. "Sir, on April 18th, Medic Coleman brought 3 Japanese women into our aid station. He claimed they were civilians, but we had no way to verify this. They could have been spies or combatants." He went on, describing how Isaiah had provided the women with excessive medical attention and preferential treatment, using supplies meant for American soldiers. How Isaiah had left camp before dawn with the women, without proper authorization. Medic Coleman showed clear bias in favor of enemy nationals, Miller concluded. His actions endangered our men and violated protocol for handling prisoners of war. When Miller finished, Reynolds turned to Isaiah. Medic Coleman, your response? Isaiah stood, his heart pounding, but his voice steady. Sir, on April 18th, I found 3 injured women in a collapsed schoolhouse. One had a crushed leg, another a broken arm, the third a head wound. They were clearly civilians, no weapons, no uniforms. He described bringing them to the aid station, providing basic medical care as was his duty as a medic, and receiving orders from Lieutenant Harper to escort them to the northern aid station. We left early because Isaiah hesitated, then decided on the truth. Because I feared for their safety. Sergeant Miller had made threats regarding the women. I believed moving them quickly was the safest option. Miller's face darkened, but Reynolds silenced him with a gesture. Lieutenant Harper, the captain said, did you order Medic Coleman to escort these prisoners north? Harper nodded. Yes, sir. We were moving wounded northward. The women were to be questioned here, where we have proper translators. Did you specify when or how they should be transported? Harper shifted uncomfortably. No, sir. I assumed they would move with the main convoy. Reynolds nodded, then turned to the women. We'll now hear from the civilians, he said. Corporal Tanaka will translate. Hana spoke first. Through Tanaka, she described how Isaiah had found them, treated their wounds, and protected them from Miller's threats. The black medic was kind, Tanaka translated. When other soldiers looked at us with hate, he saw only injured people. Aiko spoke next, her soft voice growing stronger as she described the night Miller had come drunk to their shelter, how he had spoken of accidents happening to prisoners. We were afraid, Tanaka translated, not of the medic, but of the sergeant. The medic stood between us. He kept us safe. Finally, all eyes turned to Yuki. She straightened in her chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Despite her hospital gown and missing leg, she projected a quiet dignity that filled the tent. She spoke slowly, choosing her words carefully, occasionally using English words mixed with Japanese. Through Tanaka, her story emerged. How Isaiah had carried her when she couldn't walk, how he had shared his own food and water, how he had respected their fear and pain. He could have left us, Tanaka translated. Many would have, but he said, I am taking your legs for a while. And he did. She gestured to her missing limb. Now I have no leg, but I have life, because of him. The tent was silent when she finished. Even Miller seemed subdued, his earlier anger replaced by something unreadable. Reynolds conferred briefly with the other officers, then addressed the room. We'll need time to consider all testimony. This hearing is adjourned until 1400 hours. As everyone stood to leave, Yuki caught Isaiah's eye. She bowed slightly from her seated position, a gesture of respect that moved him deeply. He returned the bow, aware of Miller watching with narrowed eyes. Whatever happened next, Isaiah knew he had done right by these women. And they, against all odds, had done right by him. Isaiah spent the hours before the hearing's resumption helping in the medical tents. Working kept his mind off what might happen. If found guilty, he could face court-martial, imprisonment, or worse. Even if cleared, the stain of accusation would follow him. At 1400 hours sharp, everyone reassembled in Medical Tent 3. The officers took their places at the table, faces serious. Isaiah and Miller sat in their chairs, neither looking at the other. Lieutenant Harper sat nearby, still uncomfortable. The women were there too, Yuki supported by her friends, face pale but composed. Captain Reynolds called the hearing to order. After reviewing all testimony and evidence, we've reached a decision. He looked at Miller. Sergeant James Miller, you are hereby relieved of your current duties and will report to Major Wilson for reassignment. Furthermore, you will face separate charges regarding conduct unbecoming of a non-commissioned officer, specifically the threatening of prisoners under U.S. military protection. Miller's face flushed dark red. "Sir, with all due respect." "That's all, Sergeant," Reynolds cut him off. "You're dismissed." For a moment, Miller looked like he might explode. Then, with a stiff salute, he turned and left the tent, back rigid with anger. Reynolds turned to Isaiah. "Medic Isaiah Coleman, you are cleared of all charges. While your decision to leave camp early was unorthodox, we find it was justified under the circumstances. You acted to protect prisoners in your care, as was your duty." Relief flooded through Isaiah, so powerful he felt lightheaded. "Thank you, sir," he managed. Reynolds nodded, then addressed the room. "This hearing is concluded." As the officer stood to leave, Reynolds approached Isaiah. "You did right by these women, Coleman. Not everyone would have." He glanced at Yuki, then back to Isaiah. "They'll be moved to a proper POW facility tomorrow. Better conditions, medical care for the duration." "Thank you, sir," Isaiah said again, meaning it. "What about me?" "Back to your unit. We need every medic we can get." Reynolds hesitated. "Miller has friends. Watch your back." After Reynolds left, Isaiah turned to the women. Through Tanaka, he thanked them for their testimony. "You risked much to speak for me," he said. Yuki smiled faintly. "You risked more for us," Tanaka translated. "It was right to speak truth." Aiko stepped forward suddenly. She reached into the folds of her simple dress and pulled out a small cloth pouch, worn and faded. She pressed it into Isaiah's hand, speaking quickly in Japanese. "She says it's a charm for protection," Tanaka translated. "Her grandmother made it. She wants you to have it." Isaiah was stunned by the gift. "Tell her I'm honored, but I can't accept something so personal." When Tanaka translated, Aiko shook her head firmly. She spoke again, her soft voice insistent. "She says you must take it, for what you did for Yuki, for all of them." Isaiah looked down at the small cloth pouch, then carefully tucked it into his breast pocket. "Thank you," he said, bowing slightly to Aiko. "I will keep it safe." As they prepared to leave, Yuki spoke one last time, her English halting but clear enough. "You took my legs," she said, gesturing to herself and then to him, "but gave me life." Isaiah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Corporal Tanaka helped Yuki stand, supporting her as Hana and Aiko gathered on her other side. As they left the tent, Yuki looked back once, her dark eyes meeting his. In that moment, Isaiah saw not an enemy, not a Japanese, not even a woman with one leg. He saw simply another human being, caught in the same terrible war, finding moments of decency in a world gone mad. He watched them go, knowing he would likely never see them again. The small cloth charm rested against his heart, a reminder that even in war, humanity could survive, damaged, perhaps, like Yuki's body, but unbroken in spirit. 3 days later, Isaiah received orders to return to his unit. The fighting had intensified along the southern front, and every medic was needed. He packed his few belongings, the cloth charm tucked safely in his breast pocket. The women had already been transferred to a POW facility farther north, away from the fighting. Isaiah had tried to check on them one last time before they left, but regulations prevented it. He had to be content with Tanaka's assurance that they would be treated well, especially after Captain Reynolds' personal interest in their case. The journey back to his unit took most of a day, bouncing in the back of a supply truck, with a dozen other soldiers returning to the front. No one talked much. The closer they got to the fighting, the quieter everyone became, lost in their own thoughts and fears. Isaiah's unit had moved since he'd left. They were now dug in along a ridge, overlooking a valley where Japanese forces were entrenched. The familiar sounds of war, artillery, machine guns, men shouting, grew louder as the truck approached the American lines. The driver stopped a quarter-mile from the front. "End of the line," he called. "Follow that trench to your units." Isaiah jumped down from the truck, medical bag slung over his shoulder. The weight of it felt both familiar and strange after his days at the aid station. He walked along a zigzagging trench, passing tired soldiers who barely glanced at him. He found his segregated unit in a small ravine, just behind the main American line. The other black soldiers looked up as he approached, surprise and curiosity on their dirty faces. Lewis, the supply clerk, who had brought him food that first morning with the Japanese women, was the first to greet him. "Coleman, thought you were dead or in the stockade." Isaiah set down his bag. "Not yet." Lewis grinned, clasping his shoulder. "Heard all kinds of stories. That you ran off with Jap women. That you got in trouble with Miller." "Some of that's true," Isaiah admitted. "It's a long story." "Well, you picked a good time to come back. We're moving out tomorrow. Big push to clear the southern peninsula." Isaiah nodded, not surprised. The war was reaching its climax on Okinawa. Both sides were throwing everything they had into the fight. That night, as Isaiah sat with his unit around a small fire, carefully shielded from enemy observation, he told them a simplified version of what had happened, about finding the women, protecting them from Miller, the hearing. The men listened with varying reactions. Some nodded approval, others looked skeptical. War made every situation more complex, every moral choice more fraught. "So what happened to Miller?" Lewis asked when Isaiah finished. "Reassigned, and facing charges of his own." Lewis whistled low. "Bet that didn't sit well. Miller's got friends." "So Captain Reynolds warned me." Another soldier, Jackson, leaned forward. "And the women? The Japs?" "Japanese," Isaiah corrected gently. "They're at a POW facility up north." He didn't mention Yuki's leg. That felt too personal somehow, too intimate to share around a campfire. Jackson shrugged. "Still the enemy, even if they are women." Isaiah thought about that. Were they the enemy? Hana with her quiet dignity, Aiko with her grandmother's charm, Yuki with her fierce determination. They hadn't chosen this war any more than he had. "Maybe," he said finally, "but sometimes being human matters more than which side you're on." The conversation moved on to other topics. Tomorrow's mission, letters from home, rumors about the European front. Isaiah listened without joining in. His hand went occasionally to his breast pocket, feeling the outline of Aiko's charm. He thought about Yuki, learning to walk with one leg in some POW camp, about her quiet words, "You took my legs, but gave me life." He wondered if she would make it home to Hiroshima after the war, if any of them would make it home. As the fire died down, the men drifted off to sleep. Isaiah lay awake, watching stars appear between patches of clouds. The distant rumble of artillery continued, a reminder that the war wasn't over. That tomorrow would bring more death, more wounds to treat, more choices to make between duty and humanity. But tonight, he felt a strange peace. He had done what his mother had asked, remembered who he was, stayed human in the midst of inhumanity. The world hadn't changed. The army was still segregated, the war still raged, prejudice still festered. But for a brief moment, on this blood-soaked island, he had done something that mattered. He touched Aiko's charm one last time, then closed his eyes, letting exhaustion pull him towards sleep. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. Tonight he would rest, carrying the memory of 3 women who had seen him, truly seen him, not as black, not as American, but as a human being worthy of gratitude and respect. It wasn't victory, it wasn't even justice, but in this war, it was something precious and rare, a moment of grace. The next morning dawned hot and humid. Isaiah woke before the sun, his body remembering the rhythm of war. Around him, other soldiers from his unit were already preparing for the day's mission, checking weapons, eating cold rations, writing last letters home just in case. Lewis sat down beside Isaiah, offering him a cup of bitter army coffee. "Ready for this?" Isaiah took the cup with a nod of thanks. "As ready as I'll ever be." "Battalions moving south," Lewis said, keeping his voice low. "They say the Japanese are making a last stand down there. Going to be rough." Isaiah sipped the coffee, letting the harsh taste wake him fully. It's always rough. The lieutenant in charge of their unit, a white officer named Daniels, called them together for a briefing. Isaiah stood at the back of the group, medical bag ready. "We're supporting the main advance at 0700, Daniels explained, pointing to a crude map. "Our job is to clear any resistance along this ridge. Medics will set up here." He pointed to a small depression behind the planned American position. Questions? There were none. By now, everyone knew the drill. As the men dispersed to make final preparations, Isaiah checked his supplies. Bandages, sulfa powder, morphine, tourniquets, the tools of his trade. The instruments that stood between wounded men and death. His fingers brushed against Iko's charm in his breast pocket. He took it out, studying the faded cloth, wondering what prayers or hopes had been sewn into it. After a moment, he carefully tucked it back, close to his heart. At precisely 0700, the American artillery opened up. The ground shook with the force of the barrage, dust and debris raining down into their positions. After 10 minutes of shelling, the infantry began to advance. Isaiah moved with them, staying low, medic's bag clutched tightly. Ahead, Japanese machine guns began to chatter, their distinctive sound cutting through the general chaos of battle. Men dropped, some dead instantly, others screaming for medics. Isaiah worked methodically, moving from one wounded soldier to the next. White, black, it didn't matter now. Blood was red regardless of who shed it. He bandaged wounds, administered morphine, marked men for evacuation. By midday, the battle had reached a fever pitch. The Americans had taken the ridge, but at heavy cost. The Japanese were counterattacking from the south, desperate to reclaim the high ground. Isaiah found himself in a shallow depression with 3 badly wounded men, 2 white privates and a black corporal. He worked quickly, stemming bleeding, stabilizing broken bones. "Medic, we need a medic over here." The call came from somewhere to his right. "I'll be back," Isaiah told the wounded men. "Stay still." He crawled out of the depression, keeping his head down as bullets snapped overhead. The call had come from a small cluster of rocks where several soldiers had taken cover. Isaiah was halfway there when the mortar shell hit. The world exploded in noise and pressure. He felt himself lifted, thrown, then slammed back to earth. For a long moment, he couldn't hear, couldn't see, couldn't feel. Slowly, sensation returned. Pain first, sharp in his left side. Then sound, muffled as if underwater. Finally sight, blurry, the world tilting strangely. Isaiah tried to move. His left arm responded sluggishly. Something warm and wet soaked his side. "Coleman! Coleman, you hit?" The voice came from far away. Isaiah blinked, trying to clear his vision. A face swam into view. Lewis, eyes wide with concern. "I'm okay," Isaiah tried to say, but the words came out slurred. Lewis was examining him, hands moving quickly over Isaiah's body. "Shell fragment," he reported. "Left side, just below the ribs. Not too deep, but you're bleeding." Isaiah nodded, the movement making his head spin. "Help me up." "You crazy? You need to get back to the aid station." "There are wounded men," Isaiah insisted, struggling to sit. "I need to help them." Lewis pressed him back down. "You're one of the wounded now. Others will help them." Isaiah wanted to argue, but his strength was ebbing. The pain in his side was getting sharper, more insistent. He fumbled for his medic's bag, trying to reach the morphine. Lewis understood. He took out a syringe and administered the drug. "Hang tight. I'll get a stretcher team." As Lewis crawled away, Isaiah lay looking up at the sky. Blue, peaceful, unmarked by war. The morphine began to work, dulling the pain, making the world soft around the edges. His hand moved to his breast pocket, feeling for Iko's charm. It was still there, though damp with blood. Perhaps it had worked. The wound could have been much worse. "Thank you," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was thanking Iko or God, or just the random chance that had kept the shell fragment from striking a few inches higher. Time became fluid. Isaiah drifted in and out of awareness. Sometimes there were voices, hands moving him, pain flaring despite the morphine. Sometimes there was just the sky, endless blue. Later, minutes or hours, he couldn't tell, he was on a stretcher, being carried back through American lines. The sounds of battle grew more distant. The medics carrying him spoke in low voices, discussing his wound, his chances. "He'll make it," one said, "if infection doesn't set in." "Lucky," the other replied. "Couple inches to the right, it would have hit his liver." Lucky, Isaiah thought as darkness closed in. Is that what I am? His last conscious thought was of Yuki, learning to walk on one leg. Of her words, "You took my legs, but gave me life." Now, perhaps she had returned the favor. Isaiah woke to the sound of rain on canvas. He blinked slowly, trying to orient himself. He was in a large tent, one of many cots arranged in neat rows, a field hospital. His side throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. When he tried to sit up, a firm hand pressed him back down. "Easy there, Coleman. You're not ready for gymnastics just yet." The voice belonged to a white doctor, middle-aged, with tired eyes and a 3-day beard. He was checking the bandage on Isaiah's side. "How bad?" Isaiah asked, his voice rough from disuse. "Shell fragment tore up some muscle, nicked your spleen. We patched you up, but you lost a lot of blood." The doctor finished his examination. "You'll live, no duty for at least 2 weeks, though." Isaiah nodded. "The battle? Still going, but the word is Japan's on its last legs. Can't last much longer." The doctor moved on to the next patient, leaving Isaiah to process this information. 2 weeks. The war might be over before he returned to duty. The thought was both relieving and strange. After so long living day by day, hour by hour, the idea of an after seemed almost unreal. The days in the field hospital blurred together. Isaiah slept, ate when told to, took medicine, and slowly regained his strength. Other wounded came and went, some returning to their units, others evacuated to hospitals farther back. A few carried out silently under sheets. On the 5th day, Lewis visited. He looked older somehow, his usually cheerful face solemn. "How you doing, Coleman?" he asked, sitting on the edge of the cot. "Better," Isaiah replied. "Doctor says I might be up and around in another few days." Lewis nodded. "Good, good." He seemed distracted, his eyes moving restlessly around the tent. "What is it?" Isaiah asked. "Bad news?" Lewis hesitated. "Not exactly. It's Miller." Isaiah felt a chill, despite the hospital tent's heat. "What about him?" "He's dead." Lewis said it flatly. "Killed 2 days ago in the fighting on the southern peninsula. Sniper got him." Isaiah didn't know what to say. He had hated Miller, feared him even. But death was final in a way that no other punishment could be. "There's more," Lewis continued. "Before he died, he was telling anyone who would listen that you were a Jap lover, that you'd betrayed your country by helping those women." Isaiah closed his eyes briefly. Even in death, Miller's hatred lived on. "Most don't believe it," Lewis added quickly, "or don't care. But there are a few. Just watch yourself when you get back." "Always do," Isaiah said quietly. After Lewis left, Isaiah lay thinking about Miller, about hatred that ran so deep it poisoned everything it touched. Had Miller's last thoughts been of revenge, of anger? What a waste of a final moment. Isaiah's hand moved to his breast pocket, feeling for Aiko's charm. It had been cleaned along with his uniform, the bloodstains mostly gone. He took it out, running his thumb over the faded cloth. Whatever prayers or hopes had been sewn into it, they were stronger than Miller's hatred. He closed his eyes, thinking of the 3 women who had defended him, who had seen his humanity when others had tried to deny it, who had given him a gift when they had nothing else to give. In a war that took so much, they had given him something precious. The knowledge that kindness could survive even here, even now, on this blood-soaked island so far from home. By the time Isaiah was well enough to leave the hospital, the battle for Okinawa was in its final stages. Japanese resistance was crumbling, though at terrible cost to both sides. The island had become a graveyard for thousands, American, Japanese, Okinawan. Isaiah was assigned light duty at the main field hospital rather than returning to the front. His wound was healing well, but the doctors wanted him under observation for another week. He didn't mind. Working in the hospital used his skills without putting him back in the line of fire. One morning in late June, as Isaiah was changing bandages on a row of wounded men, a familiar face appeared in the hospital tent. Captain Reynolds. "Coleman," the captain called, motioning him over. "Got a minute?" Isaiah excused himself and approached the officer. "Yes, sir." Reynolds studied him. "You're looking better. That side healing up?" "Yes, sir. Should be back to full duty next week." Reynolds nodded. "Good, but that's not why I'm here." He hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I thought you might want to know about those Japanese women." Isaiah's heart quickened. "Are they all right, sir?" "They're fine. Being treated well at the POW facility." Reynolds paused. "The one with the leg, Yuki, she asked about you. Apparently she heard some wounded were brought in from your unit." Isaiah was stunned. "She asked about me?" "News travels, even in POW camps." Reynolds shrugged. "I told her you were wounded but recovering." She seemed relieved. Isaiah didn't know what to say. The idea that Yuki, dealing with her own injury and captivity, would spare a thought for him was both humbling and moving. "Thank you for telling me, sir." Reynolds nodded. "There's something else. The war's winding down. These women will be repatriated soon, sent back to Japan when things settle down." He gave Isaiah a significant look. "Thought you might want to see them before they go." Isaiah's breath caught. "Is that possible, sir?" "I've arranged transport. Tomorrow morning, if you can be spared here." Reynolds held up a hand. "Official visit. Checking on prisoner welfare. Nothing more." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." After Reynolds left, Isaiah stood for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened. He would see the women again, see Yuki again, say a proper goodbye. He touched Aiko's charm in his pocket, wondering if its magic extended to granting wishes he hadn't even known he had. The next morning, Isaiah was ready well before the appointed time. His uniform was as clean and pressed as field conditions allowed. His wound ached slightly, but he ignored it. Captain Reynolds arrived in a jeep, nodding approvingly at Isaiah's appearance. "Let's go," he said simply. The POW facility was about an hour's drive north. As they traveled, Reynolds explained that it housed mainly civilians and lower-ranking Japanese soldiers. The high-ranking officers were kept elsewhere. "Conditions are decent," he said. "Better than most POW camps in this war." They passed through 2 checkpoints before reaching the main gate. Reynolds showed papers to the guards, who saluted and waved them through. Inside, the facility was surprisingly orderly. Simple barracks arranged in rows, a central area for meals and gathering, medical tents to one side. The prisoners moved about freely within the fenced perimeter, some sitting in small groups, others walking alone. Reynolds led Isaiah to a small building near the medical area. "They're waiting inside," he said. "Take your time. I'll be back in an hour." Isaiah nodded, suddenly nervous. What would he say to them? What could he say? He took a deep breath and entered the building. It was a simple room with a table and chairs, probably used for interrogations or meetings. By the window stood 3 familiar figures. They turned as he entered. For a moment, no one spoke. Yuki stood with the help of a wooden crutch, her left pant leg pinned neatly below the knee. She looked thinner, paler, but her eyes were the same, dark, determined, alive. Hana and Aiko flanked her, both looking healthier than when Isaiah had last seen them. Clean clothes, washed faces, hair neatly combed. "Coleman-san," Hana said, bowing slightly. "Hello," Isaiah replied, bowing in return. He gestured to his side. "I was injured, but I'm okay now." A young Japanese-American soldier stepped forward, not Tanaka, but another translator. "I will help you speak with them," he offered. Isaiah nodded gratefully. Through the translator, he told them about his wound, his recovery, the progress of the war. They listened intently, asking occasional questions. "They say they are sorry you were hurt," the translator relayed, "but glad you will recover." Isaiah smiled. "Tell them I've had good protection." He took Aiko's charm from his pocket, showing it to them. "It kept me safe." When the translator conveyed this, Aiko's face lit up. She spoke rapidly, gesturing animatedly. "She says her grandmother made it for her father in the last war. It kept him safe then, too. She is very happy it protected you." Isaiah carefully returned the charm to his pocket. "I will keep it always," he promised. They talked for a while longer. The women told him about their treatment in the POW facility. Correct, if basic. They had enough food, medical care, shelter from the elements. They didn't complain, though Isaiah could read between the lines. Captivity was still captivity, no matter how humane. Finally, inevitably, they spoke of the future. "They will send us home when the fighting stops?" Yuki asked through the translator. Isaiah nodded. "Yes, back to Japan." Yuki's eyes held his. Through the translator, she asked, "And you? You will go home too?" "Yes, to Georgia." A silence fell. What else was there to say? They would return to their shattered country. He would return to a nation that still saw him as less than fully human. They would likely never meet again. Yuki spoke again, this time directly to Isaiah, struggling with the English. "You, good man, I not forget." Isaiah felt his throat tighten. "I won't forget you either," he said simply. She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her face, making her look younger, almost carefree. "In Japan, we say, good person have good life." The translator didn't need to interpret that. The meaning was clear in her eyes, in her smile. "In America, we say something similar," Isaiah replied. "What goes around, comes around." This the translator did have to explain, but when he finished, all three women nodded in understanding. When it was time to leave, they bowed deeply to him. Isaiah returned the gesture, bending at the waist as he had seen them do. "Sayonara," he said, using one of the few Japanese words he knew. "Goodbye," they replied in careful English. As Isaiah turned to go, Yuki called his name one last time. He looked back. "Thank you," she said clearly, "for taking my legs." Isaiah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Then he walked out into the bright Okinawan sunlight, carrying the memory of three women who had shown him that humanity could survive even the worst that war could offer. August 15th, 1945, the day the world changed. Isaiah was back with his unit, fully recovered, when the news came. Japan had surrendered. The war was over. At first, no one believed it. They had been fighting so long, had seen so much death, that the idea of peace seemed almost impossible to grasp. But as confirmation spread through the ranks, a strange mood took hold. Not quite celebration, not quite relief, but something in between. A quiet, stunned realization that they had survived, that they would go home. That night, as others broke out hidden bottles of liquor or sang victory songs, Isaiah sat alone on a hill overlooking the ocean, the same ocean that had carried him to this island of death and pain, the same ocean that would carry him home. His thoughts turned to the three women. They would be going home too, back to Japan. Back to Hiroshima, Yuki had said. He had heard rumors of terrible new bombs dropped on Japanese cities, including one called Hiroshima. He hoped it wasn't true, hoped they would find something left of their homes, their families. He touched Aiko's charm in his pocket, wondering if its protection might somehow extend to them as well. The journey home began slowly. First came weeks of waiting as transport was arranged. The wounded and those with the most service time went first. Isaiah's unit, like most of the segregated black units, was among the last scheduled. The island looked peaceful from the sea, its green hills and blue waters giving no hint of the blood that had soaked its soil. "Glad to see the last of that place," Lewis said, coming to stand beside him. "Never want to set foot on another island as long as I live." Isaiah nodded, though his feelings were more complex. Okinawa had taken much from him: blood, innocence, comrades. But it had also given him something: a test he had passed, a measure of himself he hadn't known before. The voyage home took 2 weeks. 2 weeks of crowded quarters, bad food, and endless card games. 2 weeks of men talking increasingly of home, of plans, of futures they had once thought they might never see. Isaiah joined these conversations sometimes, speaking of Georgia, of medical school perhaps, of seeing his mother and sisters again. But part of him remained distant, observing. The war had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. When they finally sailed beneath the Golden Gate Bridge, men crowded the rails, cheering and waving. San Francisco spread before them, bright and undamaged, a city that had never known enemy bombs or occupation. "We're home," Lewis shouted, clapping Isaiah on the shoulder. "We made it." Isaiah smiled and nodded, but the words rang hollow. They were in America, yes, but for a black soldier returning to the segregated South, home was a complicated concept. After processing at Fort Mason, they boarded trains heading east. White soldiers and black soldiers in separate cars, the old divisions reasserting themselves now that the emergency of war had passed. Isaiah watched California, then Nevada, Utah, Colorado slide past the windows. America was vast, beautiful, and largely untouched by the war that had ravaged so much of the world. Its cities still stood. Its fields still grew food. Its children had never known hunger or the terror of air raids. Yet it remained a land divided, a land where a man could fight and bleed for his country, only to be told where he could sit, where he could eat, where he could live. As the train crossed into Georgia, Isaiah felt a complex mix of emotions: joy at being so close to family again, apprehension about returning to the South's strict racial codes after years away, uncertainty about his future. He touched Aiko's charm, drawing comfort from it as he had so many times during the war. Whatever came next, he would face it with the same quiet courage he had found on Okinawa. The train pulled into the station in Atlanta on a warm October afternoon. Isaiah gathered his duffel bag, straightened his uniform, and stepped onto the platform. Around him, other returning soldiers were being greeted by family members. Embraces, tears, laughter. He scanned the crowd, looking for his mother and sisters. For a moment, he didn't see them. Then a voice called his name, high, clear, familiar. "Isaiah! Isaiah!" And there they were, his mother, looking older, more tired, but with the same strength in her eyes. His 3 sisters, the youngest now a teenager, all of them waving frantically. Isaiah moved toward them, feeling as if he were in a dream. His mother reached him first, wrapping her arms around him with surprising strength. "My boy," she whispered, "my boy came home." His sisters surrounded him, all talking at once, touching his uniform, his face, as if to convince themselves he was real. Isaiah held them, breathed in the familiar sense of home, and felt something tight inside him begin to loosen. He had made it. Against all odds, he had survived the war and returned to those who loved him. As they walked to the colored section of the station, his mother kept her arm linked with his, as if afraid he might disappear. "You look different," she said, studying his face. "Older." "It was a long war, Mama," Isaiah replied. She nodded, understanding more than he had said. "Well, you're home now. That's what matters." Home. The word still felt strange, distant, but as they boarded the bus that would take them to their small house, as his sisters chattered about neighborhood news and his mother spoke of the garden she had planted, Isaiah felt the first real stirrings of peace. That night, in his childhood bedroom that now seemed too small, too ordinary after what he had seen, Isaiah took out Aiko's charm. He held it in his palm, thinking of 3 women on the other side of the world. Were they home now too? Had they found family waiting? Had they begun to heal, To rebuild? He would never know. Their lives had intersected briefly, intensely, then separated again. Small threads in the vast tapestry of the war. Yet he would carry them with him always. Hana's quiet dignity, Aiko's generous spirit, Yuki's fierce determination. "Thank you," he whispered to the charm, to the women, to whatever force had allowed their paths to cross. "Thank you for reminding me that even in war, we can choose to be human." He placed the charm carefully on his bedside table, a talisman from another world, another life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, finding work, facing the old prejudices, building a future in a country that had not yet lived up to its promises. But tonight, he would rest. Tonight, he was home. Outside his window, Georgia's night sounds filled the darkness. Cicadas, distant dogs, the occasional passing car. So different from Okinawa's nights of artillery and fear. Yet in both places, the same stars wheeled overhead. The same moon shone down on him, on the women, on all who had survived. In that commonality, that shared sky, Isaiah found a measure of peace. Enough, at least, for this first night home. Enough to sleep without dreams of war. Enough to face tomorrow. The war was over. Life, with all its challenges and possibilities, awaited. Isaiah closed his eyes and slept.